Okay, so stop me if you've heard this one. A rabbi, a pastor, and an imam walk into a bar. Okay, so it wasn't a bar, it was a diner. To discuss my show, The Story of God, about apocalypse. So the rabbi says,
share with me a little bit about how the Islamic tradition and the Christian tradition understand the apocalypse.
I think Christians should go first on this one since we're the new kids on the block.
Jesus said, no one knows the time nor the hour except the Father. We are aware that something is coming, but it is not something to fear, it's something to motivate us to do our best now in preparation.
The narrative of the end of days is really a collective story about how human beings will come to an end. The mountains will become like wool, and the seas will boil, and there will be great wars, and people will be scattered like moths.
In general, the term apocalypse isn't one that's used often in Judaism. We see a little bit about the end of days in the book of Daniel, but I don't think that there's so much about the signs of the end of days.
One thing that's interesting to note is that there's a passage in the Bible that says, to God, 1,000 years is a day. And so we may not be talking about literal days, and when we look at some of these huge events, and then you take a look at the global warming issue that's taking place. And so it is possible that a lot of these events are spread out over years, perhaps even decades.
So here's something to think about. If you knew that the end of days was coming, what would you do?
I would do something that would probably fly in the face of the whole notion of things coming to an end, and plant a walnut tree. It takes 80 years to grow.
I would brace myself to meet God.
I could see you with a placard. The end of days are coming.
That's how I know it's Tuesday, because there's always someone on my way to work with a sign saying the end of days is coming, and I'm like, oh, it must be Tuesday. I think for me, one of the things I do is I start eating a lot of chocolate with my family. It wouldn't just be chocolate for the sake of chocolate, but I'd have some time with them and really savor a sweet, sweet moment with them.
So what is one thing about the apocalypse that might be surprising for someone to hear?
It'll be the most amazing experience you can imagine.
It's that moment in which you're meeting God.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of images or stories in the Jewish tradition that guide us to imagine that, but the imagination of meeting God is such a holy endeavor.
One of the surprising factoids about the end of days in Islam is that although we have no idea when it will be, there is a tradition that says it will be on a Friday. So
not I should tell
not
the Tuesday guy.
I was thinking that when you said about
Friday.
the Tuesday guy holding the sign, said, well, you still have a few more days left, at least.
Right.
Why is it that young people in particular are intrigued by this idea of apocalypse?
I think it deals with all of the uncertainties about life. If you think about the apocalypse, and if you have a perspective or a path to it, there's probably a little bit of peace that you get.
It seems almost oxymoronic that young people are so focused and fixated on the end of times, because the whole definition of what it means to be young is to think that they're going to live forever, and they aren't thinking about the long-term consequences of their choices.
By considering the idea that the world as we know it is coming to an end, allows us to consider the personal meaning that we put into our own lives and the actions that we take in the world, so we can become accountable for all that we do.
So when's it going to happen?
Tomorrow.
Friday.
Tuesday.
Cool.